All right, we are recording.
Okay.
So, yes, we've got a three-act play. It's an hour and 45 minutes, and it's going to air or premiere, I should say, on September 25th at 6 p.m. And I'm talking with the author and narrator. And George, how do I say your last name? Because I want to say it French. Is it like Currier?
No, just Currier.
Currier. Okay. I didn't want to get that wrong on Saturday. So sorry about that. We were just talking about Paris. So now you know I took French in high school.
Actually, it's Scotch, Irish, English.
Oh, nice.
I think maybe back to the 13th, 14th century, they may have gone into England, but that's where our background is actually Scotch and Irish and English.
Mine too. Well, you know, this many generations, I feel more Heinz 57, but my grandparents could say like this one was all Irish and this one was all Swedish. And as they immigrated, like I told you, the Whitfields came from Canada. Okay, so we're talking two nickels make a dime. And I wanted to start with your inspiration for writing this play.
Well, I was on St. Mary's City Council for about 11, 12 years, and we were involved in a lot of city improvement projects. Here are two major ones on the streets in downtown. And after I finished my tour with the city council, I was hired as the executive director for the Timber Plus, its economic development agency there, and dealt in a lot of grants. I was able to secure grants for a mural project in town. So I had about a dozen murals, I think, all in all, that were placed throughout town, different historical points. And also was able to get a grant for some historical signs that were placed around town. My goal was to have a walking tour of St. Mary's with people could bring their boats in down below or drive in and take this walking tour of the history of our town. And that worked out pretty good. I had the walking tour here. I had a like that. That was the tour. Those are pictures of the different paintings that we had. I had this woman, Nancy Brown in Emida. She did most all the murals. The goal was to create a walking tour to create St. Mary's where it would have a for day tourists coming in from Spokane. They could come in and they'd have something to do. We wanted to buy the railroad station and move it to the Cremana building and make it a little museum. And the walking tour would start there, go throughout the town, and end up at the Hughes House, another historical place. But then we're trying to get things to attract people in. And I always thought that a play might do it, where we could have a play that we put on maybe 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times a year, around centered around the Paul Bunyan Days, which is the main festival that town has. Pardon me. And that was my goal, to do that. And it just kind of laid idle for years. And they have this blog called Living or Being Raised in Benewall County or something like that. And I put that forward in that blog. And they said, "Why don't you do it, George?" I said, "Well, okay." I didn't think I would do it because I don't have any experience in that. So I tried to gain a little experience in it. And anyway, that's the inspiration for it, was to try to get a tourist attraction, something to buffet the tourist attraction, plus the interest of the logging history of St. Mary's. I've always been interested in the history of St. Mary's. wrote a little book on it, in fact. And I just thought that was a natural thing to do. That's where the inspiration came from.
And that's the first rule in nonprofit is he who has the idea just volunteered.
But we were able to get some good grants there, and the town's a beautiful little town. It's just a pleasant town. And I just could see that maybe they could do that play and they could have a lot of fun with that play. Anyway, that was the idea. That was the inspiration. Nothing earth-shattering, just trying to buffet what we had already started.
No, I love that. Now, what is your connection to St. Mary's? I mean, did you grow up there? Did you have family there?
30. I moved there, and we lived there about 30 years. The wife was from North Dakota, and she lived in Avery, which is a small town out of St. Mary's. She lived there for a few years, and then she moved into St. Mary's. We were married. But my connection just outsiders came in and just loved the town.
Well, after 30 years, you can say you're a resident, right?
Sometimes. Not anymore, though. We moved to Lewiston for the climate.
And what was your process? How did you research the life of a logger in 1914?
Well, YouTube was handy. I ran across this site, British Columbia, that they have a operating steam dump, and they have a logging thing for tourists where they run the steam dump, just as it was in the old days. So I did have that for history, but Burt Russell wrote many books about that area, and I certainly read his. In fact, one of the characters that I mentioned, John Ennis, came from one of his books. But Up the Swiftwater, that was another one. Good source on Herrick and the mills was an article from the Pacific Northwesterner back in '71. It mentioned Herrick's life, and in there it mentions Herrick Grotto, which was his walking boss. His walking boss spoke directly for the owner always. In this case, they had 2 or 3 camps there, and he worked between those camps. Grotto did. So that was a lot of information came from there. Up to Swiftwater, White Pine, the King of the Forest, or something like that. That was another book. Good Museum of North Idaho, they had a couple of articles that I found that were really helpful to it. And Ruby Holt's book, Steamboats in the Timber, that was another one. That's a good book. She really did some. She put out some good books. As did Burt Russell. Burt Russell had all his books. Are you familiar with any of his?
Yes.
Yeah, you know that all the interviews, all his old time. He got them before they died. He did a real good service to the loggers. But that was the sources, and I also had the good fortune for the last 12, 13 years. I volunteered at Habitat at Habitat for Humanity. And one of my partners there, an old fellow, Art Hall. Now, Art Hall was a forester for Diamond National and the old, not Dollar, the Ohio Maps. Diamond National bought him out. But he was right up there in the Divisio and the Homestead watershed, right there in, they both sold feed Marble Creek. And he was right there. And here I am working with him, interested in this book, and interested in writing this play. So he was a good source too on much of the stuff going up there. We knew a lot of the same people, like Erlen Knoll. He was a logger. He had a camp back up there during this period of time, and shortly thereafter. People like that we knew in common, and we could and he could buffet the stories I'd heard from them. verify. But that was really what I used for research.
That's perfect. I love that. You're put right into the place that you need to be to talk to the person that you need to talk to create your art. That's very divine.
I was really fortunate with Art. In fact, Art and I had coffee together yesterday at those hours here. We talked about this thing. I said I was going to be talking to you about that. You probably wondered what the heck is going on, George. You don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, well, he's gonna. Has he read your play?
Did he write it?
No, did he? Has he read it?
Oh, not to him. No, he works puzzles and reads books. I didn't offer it to him. I think he would. He did read. I copied that Northwestern story on Herrick because he was really interested in that because it was all up there. And he read that. I copied it, and he read that. He really enjoyed that. So maybe he would enjoy the play, but I didn't know.
Well, maybe he'll tune
I
in.
think I will offer it. That's a good idea.
What is the source for the historical photographs that you have for the backgrounds?
Well, I didn't expect those photos to be used. I just put them together for a presentation when I read the play the only other time I read it was in St. Mary's. And they weren't very professional photos, you could see. I took one of them and cut another one up and pasted it on there, then went down and took a picture of it. So the sources were the one of the bordello, that was from the internet, and it was a free one. The one on the first one on the St. Mary's waterfront was just an old copy I had. I had to enhance it with colored pencil. So these weren't really meant to be used in the play. And the source just came from different places, you know.
Oh, but I love them. I you've got like the curtain effect around them, and
Thank you.
I enjoyed them because I don't know that I have something that would be that specific. I mean, you've got the guys, in the creek, and I don't have a photograph of guys washing their clothes.
Well, they have one that I saw at the Marble Creek Station. They have a Forest Service historical station like up there. And Art and I went up there into Marble Creek. He was showing me some of the creeks, and we were discussing it. But we stopped at that place, and they had a photo there, but it was such poor quality, and it showed them actually out in the water. That's where I got the idea. So then I got this other photo that showed them on the bank, and so I superimposed on the picture that I had of the creek. So it wasn't done very professionally, but it worked, I guess.
I think I was going to say it works because it's a more powerful visual, I think, than just, a picture of the creek by itself. That we can really see the setting for this play, which circumstances being what they are, we have to do this all virtual. I would love to see this on the stage. Done proper during a time when we can gather in person and watch and experience, where you have the sound coming in, and we're just so limited in 2020 with the resources and the technologies that we have in our homes, myself included. But I think that everyone's been doing a really good job of stepping into that new normal.
Mm-hmm. I wish the play could be performed. I wish it could go just as I figured, because the historical narration, I didn't know if that would work or not, but I saw it work in good. Our Town was done years ago. But St. Mary's history is so doggone interesting. I just wanted to get some of that out because I just love the history of the town, centered around the waterfront often.
Yeah. And that leads me into my next question about, Haas and Nick and Jake and Squawk. Are these real people? Are they based on real, I'm sure there's stories, but I mean, was there a guy named Haas? Are we telling his story?
Not really, but there's certain people I had in mind, like Traveling Skip, the union organizer. Well, there was a Skip Robinson in town, which was related to Bill Robinson, which I mentioned on the first narration. Well, Robinson, I just love him. In fact, one of the grandsons was semi-engaged one of my daughters at one time. So it didn't work out. He passed away by now. But anyway, the Robinsons are just, Skip was one of the sons of Bill Robinson, the one I mentioned. And he was just an all-around good guy. I had him in mind for Traveling Skip. I had him in mind at the tavern door because one time Skip was there in town and he was kind of around there at times. And he was at the door of the bar with a dog. He had a little dog in his arm. The dog had a bowler hat on and he had a bowler hat on. And I heard of the incident, and I'm sure that he said, can a logger get a drink in here? Or something to that sort, because that was Skip. Anyway, I had him in mind for Traveling Skip. And Herrick, he was a real person. Bill Grotto was a real person. He was the walking boss. Thelma, I had kind of a woman up there that I knew named, she was our neighbor, Rose Baldock. She was a cook at one time. She's also a bartender. One time she bartended in Avery. There were 7 bars in Avery. Each went up a different ravine. I don't know if it was legal alcohol there or not. She worked in each one of those in 1 week. One day one day and the other as relief bartender. But she also cooked at times for the different logging camps. She just had some good stories too about logging camp. But she was a real person. But as far as Haas, no, he was conglomeration. I knew Lee Carpenter and a few of those other guys that I had in mind. Each of them had little things in their histories, and kind of a composite. As far as Squawk goes, I did know of kids that were in St. Anthony's. I do know that the governor came in 1912 and investigated the place, and that the kids were mistreated. So Squawk is based on historical fact. Just this story, I took a lot. And Nell, Boathouse Nell, she was one of the madams in town. Everybody in St. Mary's knows Boathouse Nell and speaks of her kindly because she was good to the loggers. And so she was a real person. And she was a kind person. I tried to get that across too. She was a kind person. But Haas was kind of a conglomerate. Squawk was based on historical fact. Frenchy Lee, I had in mind, there was years ago, in about 1914, 1915, a fella had jumped a train in Plummer, his Frenchman. And he was here going to go work in the woods. And he jumped a train, and the Frenchman, they spent the night out at sleeping on the ground. And there was another fellow there. Anyway, that night, the fellow hung himself. And Frenchy, they called him Frenchy, he woke up to see this fellow hung. And so I kind of had him in mind. He went on into the logging camps around St. Mary's, and I kind of had him in mind. But I couldn't put all the story in about him that I would like to. So he was kind of based on the person. But that's about it.
Well, he can be in the sequel.
What'd you ask?
I said he can be in the sequel.
Oh, yeah, he could be. He could be because if I was to do a sequel, I'd take it Squawk and Jake. Now, Jake was kind of based on a guy that I knew that was a Boilermaker back in Kansas. So I kind of had him in mind. He drifted on out. This particular one that I knew the guy. He actually was deaf because of working in those days. The Boilermaker got inside the boiler and worked on it, and it'd pound, 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 and ring, ring, ring in his ears. And you could stand in front of him and yell his name, and he wouldn't know you were there.
Oh,
He couldn't hear him because of that. But that was kind of Jake's background. He came from Kansas and worked with the Boilermaker. He had that. And he become a logger. My dog especially right now. Anyway, that was Jake.
now there's a couple of songs that or jingles that you sing in the play. Are these written down? Were they actual songs, or did you write them?
They're my songs. They're my songs. Wobblies did sing, and the loggers in the Midwest, or Michigan, Minnesota, possibly even all the way back on the East Coast of Maine. I don't know, but they were seemed to me to be when I read about them more communal than the Northwestern logger was. They sang. They would get together in their bunkhouses and they'd sing. They'd play cards. Maybe the conditions were better. I don't know. The bosses were notoriously poor out in the West. Really abused it, I think, the loggers. That's why the Wobblies were embraced by the loggers. The mills didn't like the Wobblies around the area, but the loggers did because they were getting the short end of the stick all the time. But anyway, the Wobblies did have songs. I ran across a couple of them. I thought about putting them in, but I didn't like them. I said, well, I'll make my own. So that's where they came from. They worked out all right.
Now, where did the term wobbly come from? Do you know its origin?
And I read Stuart Holbrook's book on, it's called Whistle Punks, Wobblies. I forget the title of it right now. But he thought, he worked for the IWW at one time, but he thought that it came from the anecdotal talk was a Chinese fellow couldn't pronounce R's and couldn't pronounce W's rather, and so he said to come up wobbly wobbly. I don't know what. I don't mean to be racist, but I mean that's what he thought. Others thought it came from there was a term they used, wobbly, which meant sabotage, and the Wobblies did do some sabotage. It wasn't unusual for them to blow up things in order to get the attention that they needed. In fact, there was 3 of them, I think, that were indicted for blowing up, killing 3 people around Seattle. I'm not sure of that. But anyway, that they thought it came from the word sabotage with wobbly. And others thought it came from one of the big saws that cut both ways. They called it a wobbly saw, a wobble saw. I don't know. I think maybe because they were lukewarm regarding the war, the First World War, that they may have wavered in their loyalty to the flag. I thought maybe that might be that they were kind of wobbly in their loyalty to American ideals. I don't know. They don't really know. You can take your pick.
And it might vary from territory to territory too. because like you said, they came from east to west.
Yeah, it did.
Now, what they wanted was 8 hours a day, $5 a day, in a 40-hour week, which kind of comes to $40. And the loggers who made $4 a day, but worked 12-hour days and 6 days a week, was only 24. So they were really kind of ramping up for a big raise per logger, if my math is correct.
Yeah, it was. I saw that you're figuring on that. And the Herrick was one of the first ones to, not the first, there's 2 or 3 other ones in Santa and around there that did concede. When Herrick conceded, the association, the protective association, just blackballed him right off the bat because he conceded and give him the extra pay. So I didn't want to make him a bad guy because he wasn't a bad guy. He was just being what bosses did in those days, you know. But he did come across and give raises sooner than the other ones. I really don't know if he provided the bathhouse or not. But I'm not sure about that.
Well, I mean, if you're the first one that's got a better wage, then your people don't leave. You don't have the turnover. Everyone wants to come work for you. No wonder he got blackballed.
Yeah. Finally went bankrupt, the poor fellow, back in about 1925.
Mm-hmm. So Weyerhaeuser or Rutledge took over?
Well, no, I don't know. There was a association that took over the mill in St. Mary. Mill still exists that he established, but it's gone through, you know, owner changes now. Potlatch Corporation owns it now. Originally, Herrick wanted, he was trying to ape what Weyerhaeuser had done in the little town of Potlatch. Weyerhaeuser established Potlatch, and it was actually a company town. But he treated everybody pretty good. There was homes built, businesses there, what have you. And Herrick wanted to do the same thing there in St. Mary's. He established what he called Milwaukee Town. And he had a major store there. Incidentally, he had, when the mail order stores and all started rising in American history, he was saying this unfair advantage, you know, that I have everything that they have. In other words, it kind of brings it to the internet sites we have today, saying our stores are closing down because everybody's buying on the internet. In those days, he said the stores are having a hard time because everybody's buying from Montgomery Ward's or whoever. I don't know what it was at those times. But he had a vision that St. Mary's and Milltown would become like Potlatch.
Sorry, I was on mute. You mentioned the steam donkeys, and I'm trying to wrap my head around how did they get into that steep slope? Were they on wheels?
Well, that's an interesting fact. What they did, they brought them up. Some of the first ones come up from Clarkia, and they would bring them up into Hobo Pass. And where they moved, to answer your question right off the bat, is they would pull themselves. They would be a tree there, or a spar, and they would hook to it with their cable, and then they would fire up the steam donkey, and it was on skids, and a sled like underneath, no wheels, sled, because they were so monstrously heavy, and they would pull them to the length of the cable, and they'd move the cable. They moved them up. They moved them up Hobo Pass that way. I think at one time they moved 3 or 4 at a time. Moved them up. And they had a big Willamette, and I don't know, Dave Dollar had a big Willamette up there. It was one of the biggest they had. And I don't know how he got it there because there was really no road along St. along the St. Joe. So the only way I think he could have brought it up is from Clarkia and then go the 12, 14 miles Marble Creek to where he had it stationed, I think at the mouth of St. Joe River. But that's how they do it. That's how they moved him. Incidentally, those steam donkeys, it wasn't unusual for them to blow up, explode to the steam. They always had to be near a source of water, and so they always had problems that way because they had to keep water going and use a lot of wood, like I indicate in play. They used a lot of wood, but they were dangerous machines at times. Plus, cables break, whip around, kill people. Woods were dangerous. They still are, but they were really dangerous for sure. Special breed of men that were up there.
Yeah, right. And then it's a real steep bank. Are they using Marble Creek to get the logs down to the Joe, or was there another method?
Well, at first they would, when the Swiss and the early loggers, they just cut them on the bank, drop them in the water, and then throw them down. If they're going to a mill, they had to go. There was no mills up there. I think one time somebody tried to build one, and Mo had one down Big Eddy. But they would drop them into the water and throw them on down to the mill in St. Mary's or Harrison, or even into Post Falls, Burial. But first they just cut them on the bank, and then they went up in the hillsides and they could skid them down pretty easily from the hillside, easy skid. But as they went further and further back, they built corduroy roads. They would cut trees and corduroy roads where they lay logs down, and they would use oxen. The oxen would walk on the corduroy, and they have sometimes just skid, or they would build chutes, which were dry deals. They made out of 3 or 4 logs, where they flattened out on one side, and they would skid them down there. And the oxen would hook to them. And then later they went to horses. They had big horses, and then they finally went to the steam dump. But they built the corduroy roads. They go back quite a ways with that. And then they went back further yet when they had all the numerous creeks. They would dam them up and create ponds, and then they would at a certain time they would free the water, and the water would wash the logs on down to Marble Creek. Then they were either would go on out on Marble Creek, or later when the Marble Creek was dammed, they would just be held up at Marble Creek in their different ponds that were there. So they first skidded with just horses, or oxen. Then they went to the horses, and then they brought in the steam donkeys. They could go way back on the steam donkey. The cables on the steam donkey would snake out 3/4 of a mile or more. They pull them a long ways.
Nice. And you also briefly mentioned river pigs, and everyone who took their 4th grade field trip through the museum should know what we're talking about.
That's the classic logger of the river pigs. They didn't live in the camps as far as I could determine. They lived in the Wanigans, which was the cookhouse, and which sometimes they were large enough where they could sleep in there, or they'd sleep on the raft that carried the Wanigan, or they had, I think they were called bateaux, where they're more a floating bunkhouse. With there, I've heard of Wanigans being on St. Joe, but I never heard of any bateaux being on the Clearwater. On our side, they used boats over here where I'm at right now. Their last drive they had was back in 1960 or 1970. They had Wanigans and bateaux, both. But they were quite a hardy bunch of river pigs. They rode the logs, you know. You saw the classic pictures where they had the log jam or a log floating down the river, and there's a river pig dancing from log to log to log to log. One of the fellows I mentioned in there, Wash Applegate, actually his quote that he said, and I didn't want to steal his quote from Burt Russell, but what he actually said in Burt Russell's interview of him, he said that I'd rather be a river pig and do the work of a river pig than anything. I'd rather do that than eat. He loved it so much. But they had quite a job. They would dance on the log jam, keep the logs moving. If the logs dammed up, it would be they called it a jackpot, and there could be millions of board feet of logs that they could never get out. They would be jammed up there, and they have to wait till the spring floods or something else to move them out. The logs were just lost. You know, whenever they had, I read of some jams. I think they had one on St. Mary's River at the place they called the Loops, and it was I don't know, millions of board feet of wood. I think that was lost that couldn't move it. So anyway, river pigs were interesting people. There's been some good books I think written on them. We got an interesting story.
That's a separate story in of itself, because they missed out on the camaraderie at the camps, but it sounds like they had a camaraderie with each other. Or were they more competing? You know, like that's my log, that's your log.
Well, I think they did have a good camaraderie. I read about one where a fellow got killed and went into the water, and that wasn't unusual. Matter of fact, in St. Mary's, they said, and I never saw this record otherwise, but people said that it wasn't unusual to pull bodies out of the water there in St. Mary's 1 week of loggers. Some, I guess, were drunks that fell in there, but some were people that were killed with loggers too. River pigs are interesting people.
And you reference, you know, the steamboats on the lake, especially the Georgie Oaks, which is very near and dear to the Museum of North Idaho. How did the steamers and logging culture kind of come together?
You know, I never have seen where the steamers were ever involved actually in the logging, except for resupply, things like that. It's probably there, but I could never see it. I don't remember Ruby Holt mentioning it of any connection that way, except them being at the landings and what have you. But St. Mary's history was really important because of the supplying and tourists. I was surprised back in 1905, 1910, 1915, how many people of the world that wanted to come to St. Mary's to see this shadowy St. Joe. Have you ever been up in there, in that area?
No, I haven't. Well, maybe. It's been a long time since I've been through St. Mary's, and I was geocaching.
You were what?
So, garnets. So geocaching is, you know, when you're up mining for fun.
Oh, okay. So you were going up to the garnet mine?
Yeah.
Bud McCall had all that one time up there. I don't know if you knew that or not, but he was one of the super sold it to an Australian outfit. They had the garnet mine. There's only two major garnet sources in the world, I think. One's in Australia and the one there's or Clarkie area. Possibly the one in India, I'm not sure. The geocaching. Find some gold, call me.
I will. You'll be the first one I call, George. I haven't done that in years. After you have these, then you have to find someone to cut them and polish them. And by the time you're having a specialty made piece, you could have just, gone to a store in Idaho where somebody's already done that for really close to the same price, if not cheaper sometimes, because they do that in bulk. So that's what I discovered. I did sapphires in Montana, and then Crystal Park, we went looking for amethyst, but we only came up with quartz. And just finding anyone to make those into jewelry, it was like, I could have just bought the jewelry for somebody that does this for a living.
The closest I ever come to geocaching is when I was in the foothills of Sierra. I worked for a microwave outfit, and we had microwave towers and mountain repeater sites and things like that. So I was out quite a bit. But gold, I would go out and look for gold. And I'd go out, and my boss owned a gold mine at Sutter Creek. And he had a lot of gold. He had a lot of experience in gold. And I worked the midnight to 8 shift. I'd bring in my little gold, and he'd look at it and say, "That's not gold, that's mica, or that's this, or that's that." I couldn't. He said, "Don't you know what gold looks like?" I said, "Well, I thought I did." He said, "Well, I'm going to show you some gold." So he brought in a big container. That's when gold was $36 an ounce. And it was illegal to own America, for us to own much gold. You couldn't own gold. And he brought it in, and but you could have it in the natural form. You could have gold in the natural form, but it couldn't be. There were just restrictions against holding gold. Nixon was the one who ended that, way in the 60s. But anyway, he said, "Here's what gold looks like." He said, "Go ahead and pick you out 6 or 8 pieces there, and I'll let you." Yeah, he sold it to me for $50. I gave him $50. I still got the gold. It's in rock. But anyway, if you ever want to go out and look for gold, I know what gold looks like now. I'll be glad to help you.
Yeah, I've got a really old coffee can that's got some pyrite in it, and my great grandfather, I think, found that in a mine. He and my great grandma, they liked to collect rocks, and I've got the rock collection, and that's one of them. And it came out of some mine in Wyoming. But we're talking about mining. We're supposed to be talking about logging.
Oh, okay.
But I guess, we're talking about Idaho, right? So.
No, going back to your inspiration, the idea of what we wanted to do with St. Mary's, there was a couple of things that came to mind. Jack Buell has a collection of Corvettes. I mean, a world-class collection of Corvettes. And he'd always been a strong promoter of anything he wanted to do in St. Mary's. He put his body on the line. I've seen him Sunday morning on the lawnmower mowing the lawns at the courthouse. Not the courthouse, but the federal building which the county had bought. He was out there. I mean, that's how much he is in the town. If you have a problem, he's got one of his trucks there with gravel, if you need gravel, or get his plow there to plow your driveway. He's just been a great guy. But he said he'd make these Corvettes available. And that was when I was executive director of Timber Plus. My envision was that we could build a nice little house, a nice little display area, and take 12 or 15 of those Corvettes on a rotating basis and display them. Now you'd think that St. Mary's, a Corvette museum, well, there's only one, I didn't know this, there's only one Corvette museum in America. That's back in Kentucky or Tennessee, someplace back there. And the Corvette owners, which is a pretty strong group of people that like to associate with each other, would yearly travel back there to this Corvette museum. I said, we have one on the west with Jack Buell's Corvettes. And he was willing to go along with it, but we could never get it off the ground. But it never did happen. But I just thought I'd mention that because that was one of the things we were trying to do in order to make St. Mary's convenient for a day tourist, where they had something to do. They said for every 3 hours travel, you need at least 1 hour of entertainment. I think that's the ratio that they use for when you probably know better than I do. In your association with the museum, you try to keep interesting things going. You got to have an hour or two to keep them. That was the idea. They come into town, see the Corvette Museum, they take our walking tour, and they go to our Hughes House, our Railroad Museum. It was worthwhile to visit. But he was willing to go along with it.
I think a walking tour is a fantastic idea. I know that there's cruises on the Joe. When you think about St. Mary's, it kind of reminds me of when I was living in Portland and going to the beach for the weekend, and everybody goes to the Oregon coast. So Portlanders had these little towns that they would go to that the tourists didn't really know about. And if the tourists would find them, then they would find another new beach. And the thing about St. Mary's is it feels like it's the place where people from Coeur d'Alene are escaping to, because so many people are moving here and everyone's like, you know what, I'm just going to go to St. Mary's. And it feels like that's our for us locals, that's our getaway. People are always camping down there. People are buying property down there. People are going to live down there because there are so many people from outside of Idaho that are coming in here and I think it's funny when they talk about traffic because I lived in Portland for a while. and that's like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to drive 30 minutes to go somewhere. What? Anyways.
Well, St. Mary just has all kinds of potential. We tried to develop the waterfront, which is one area. That's the problem with St. Mary's, is that the railroad, when Milwaukee came to in 1907, they built St. Mary's was kind of a switching point, I guess. But they had 7 or 9 tracks, parallel tracks. That takes a lot of space for tracks. St. Mary's has got, so that blocked the town from the river. The tracks were right there on the river. And then in 1933, they had a major flood there. And they had, as they did in 1996, and 2 times, we've had a lot of floods in St. Mary. But they built a 500-year dike there in St. Mary's. So that's between the town and the water. But there was one area where you see the pictures where the waterfront was, where they had the piers, the boardwalk. That was one area that was clear in St. Mary's, but it was wetland. And you know where you're going to go with wetland, trying to develop wetland. You can't just fill it up. If St. Mary's could have just filled it up, then they could have developed. There's a lot of people that are interested in coming in and building a motel, building a resort type thing there right on the river because it's so pretty there. But they can never do that. But we had a plan where we thought we could do it by making some mitigation changes with the Corps of Engineers. And a woman from Arkansas that had a lot of money, either from divorce, marriage, and smarts, she wanted to come in, she wanted to develop the waterfront. And so the commissioners and the city fathers got together and they come up with a plan where they could piece together 2 or 3 different pieces of property for her. But she backed out. She really went a long ways, but she backed out of it. And then somebody come and bought the waterfront, going to make a boutique out of it, going to put some piers in there and put a marriage boutique type place there, And so it took it off the market. that was there, and it's still off the market. It's still undeveloped. So St. Mary's always had kind of a hard time getting it, unless when they had the boardwalk, then it was a destination, tourist destination point. But the river's so important to the town, and you can't really use it the way it should be used.
And when it had the boardwalk, that's when the steamships would pull up,
Yeah.
right?
They had I tried to get it in the store too, but I couldn't. But they had a Miss Spokane came down one time because they started a new shipbuilding was pretty important in Coeur d'Alene, as you know. And a fella come in and he built a new fast steamer, and it was going to be used to go to St. Mary's and St. Joe, Farrell, the town of Farrell, which no longer exists. And I think even up to Coeur d'Alene is going to be used up to Coeur d'Alene, going up to Cataldo. I think they could take steamboats all the way up to Cataldo. And I wanted to get that in there because Miss Spokane came down on I think it was called the Spokane, and she came down on the steamer to St. Mary's. And I envisioned the band being down there. St. Mary's had its own band at the time, back in the 19-teens. Had a city band. And a fellow named Tossison was one of the band leaders. He'd go to city council every now and then trying to get a little money to buy instruments or pay his performers or whatever. But anyway, this Spokane, it comes, I think it finally sunk, or they blew it up. They used to like to do that on 4th of July, you know. When the ships got to the end of their lives, Coeur d'Alene would take them out there and set them on fire during the 4th of July, and they'd sink. You know that.
I do, yeah. Before the fireworks show, we would just light boats on fire. I've been trying to tell that to my high school son because outside of the Museum of North Idaho, we have some pieces of steamboat vessels, and he was asking about one, and I was like, oh, that's probably salvaged from when we sank. I think that one's the Flyer. And you know, it's got a QR code. My son pulls it up, and yeah, sure enough, you know, that's another one that, yeah, 4th of July, we sank that one when it was out of commission. And I was trying to tell him, like, all of the things on the bottom of the lake, and it's not just old steamboats. There's like old Model Ts down there from when, and I don't know if it's from St. Mary's, but people used to, instead of going around the lake with their car, they decided that they'd go over the frozen lake. Sometimes they would hit thin ice and their car would sink.
Oh, that reminds me of something I was just reading the other night about this. The fellow was one of the first mail deliverers in St. Mary's. He had a boat, and he would go up to he took the boat to St. Joe City. He had that route up to St. Joe. He'd take his boat to St. Joe City, row from St. Mary's to St. Joe. And then he'd get a canoe, because at St. Joe, the Swiftwater starts, or ends at that point, actually, but starts going up. But he'd take a pole's canoe on up to Calder, and I think maybe, Calder. Went to Calder. It was as far as he went. But he said during the winter, he could ice skate all the way from St. Joe City to 12, 13 miles up to Calder on the river, on the St. Joe River. That brings it to mind. You're talking about, I didn't realize it. They tried to get the cars to get into Coeur d'Alene on a frozen lake. That'd take a little bit of courage, you know, the foolishness to it.
Oh, we got pictures of them with the sailboats on skids, and they're actually having these contests on the frozen lake. It wasn't just ice skating, you know, they were actually like sailing. Well, you know, a long time ago, I guess the lake used to freeze. It doesn't much anymore. I don't know if that's from movement or from environment, but some of the bays do, and they still have a, you know, what's it called? Pond hockey, like shinny, I think it's called. They're out there playing hockey in the bays, but I've never seen Coeur d'Alene freeze over in my lifetime.
I think I have, but I can't remember. But cars, I had this little book that was put together, that St. Mary's scrapbook. I have in there, I went through all the records of autos. When the automobile was first introduced into St. Mary's, and then as different people, they said such and such as the new Maxwell, and somebody else has something else. They went to the licensing where they could get the names and the vehicle that they had. Kind of interesting, you know. You talked about the old Model T being in the lake. I wonder if there's some other valuable ones that some fool tried to drive up there.
Oh, I bet.
There's a lot of looking for them, I think.
There are hobby enthusiasts out there with underwater metal detectors, and we know of one, and he hasn't found anything particularly valuable. I don't know how deep he's gone, but he said there are a lot of sunglasses on the bottom of the lake.
Oh, I'll bet. Underwater there, in St. Mary's on the waterfront there was there used to be a drawbridge here, but the water on the waterfront when the boardwalk was there, this fellow I knew, Gordon Erickson, he still got children around here, but Gordy owned a gas station there. But when he was a boy, back in the early 30s, he said they'd be up and down the boardwalk, and the bars were there, saloon. And the guys come out of the saloons, and they'd pitch silver dollars out into the river, and the boys would dive for them. That's what he said. He told me that. He said they used to have a big time for that. They had the drawbridge right there, and the caretaker for the drawbridge lived up 2nd Street, about 3 blocks away. So whenever they had open the drawbridge, he'd have to come down from his house and row out to the drawbridge where the mechanism was and turn it for the people, whatever which way he had to go. I think he had to leave they blocked the river. There'd be a boat that come and had to pass. And they say many times the caretaker would be home, and the kids would run up there and get him, or if he had been drinking or something like that. Kids said sometimes they'd get out there, operate the drawbridge. I don't know. Can you imagine that? But times were a lot easier in those days, I'll tell you.
Well, part of the tourist thing, we should just say, hey, you grab your metal detectors, come look for silver dollars.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's all. Yeah, that's all the questions that I had about the play, because I don't want to give too much away before the premiere.
Can make something out of this. I don't know. No, as long as you just say St. Mary's is a nice little town.
It is. It is. I know. I know it was a long time ago when I was through there, but I definitely stopped and ate. I had a wonderful hamburger. I don't remember the name of the place, but I can see the bend in my mind, like where the road bends, and I had a burger there, and I would stop again.
Store nearby? Was there a grocery store nearby?
Okay, so yeah, now I'm driving on the road. It could have been.
Because the center of the town was Bud's, and they tore it down, and they put a credit union there. But Bud's used to be the place. Bud Lewis, a fellow named Bud Lewis, he used to be the sergeant at arms for the State House. Then he ran for representative, and he was elected, of course, and he served a few terms there till he died. And that Bud's was the place. No politician ran for office in that part of Idaho unless he went to Bud's in the morning. The loggers would get there. They had their own key. They had a key hidden there. They'd get in there about 4 o'clock in the morning, and they would go on in there, and they'd start the coffee. They'd get their coffee, and if there were any donuts left from the day before, they'd eat them. Then I've sold even cook their own breakfast. It didn't really open till 6. They were already gone by 6, back out into the woods. But Bud's was the place. I hope that you got your hamburger at Bud's. That was a historical place. Bud Lewis, when he was sergeant at arms, Nixon was president, and he had a picture taken of him and Nixon shaking hands. Politicians, they all do that. They shook hands, they take a picture, and the association say, "Well, I knew the guy." Anyway, Nixon shook hands with Bud, and Bud was proud of the photo, and he had it mounted on his wall in the restaurant. And the loggers would come in the morning, and many times they'd put their own little caption on that picture. One time, I remember the one I saw. It says that Nixon and Bud Lewis agree on price hike for hamburgers. You'd think it was real, but it was a great place. And Bud come in, he'd start his donuts, and they were the deep fried donuts, or just nothing but a grease ball. We'd all love them. We just love them. We'd eat them. But when Bud he became ill, his days were numbered, he knew it. Our local coroner, undertaker, he still lives there, and a good friend of mine, Ron Hodge. Well, so Hodge was the undertaker, and Bud would come waiting on our tables, and we said, "Well, how you doing, Bud?" And he wasn't taking this business of dying too well. And they would come to him and say, "Well, how you doing, Bud?" He said, "Well, just dodging Hodge." Hodge the undertaker. Anyway, that's kind of gruesome, I guess, but that showed he was a good man.
Nice. Now I'm going to have to go look that up. I bet we have a photo of that somewhere in our archives. Well, thank you for allowing me to interview you before we do the premiere. It also allows me to test our software and make sure that things are going to work well on the 25th.
Oh, good. And it got me. I had to learn Zoom. So
that is something we've all had to do this year.
Yeah. Thank you for the education, and thank you for the opportunity to say a little bit about the play, because I just love to see St. Mary, somebody there in Paul Bunyan Day Committee maybe pick it up. I think it just could be a heck of a lot of fun, I think.
Oh, I agree.
Have it yearly, and 3 or 4 performances a year. The 2 big occasions at St. Mary's were the Paul Bunyan Days and the county fair. I thought this could be sandwiched in there somewhere. They have a new music shell down in the park. People can come just sit on the lawn, and everybody can have a good time, They have what they call the largest topless bar in the world.
Yeah.
That's Paul Bunyan Days, and it's a bar out in the open. Well, I could just envision on the one end of the show that people would be there drinking beer and whatever and watching the show, and the other people with the families would be, it wouldn't take too much to clean it up there. It could be good for families. They could be sitting on the grass watching it. That's what I envisioned. I'd just love to see that happen. Maybe someday.
I think that's doable. I think that is.
Sure be fun.